Chapter 6. A Privileged Childhood. Little Jamie had a privileged childhood. His mother quit her job when he was born. "The trouble with Ilona is that it takes too little to make her happy," said her father, who thought that she should get a divorce, but she wouldn't. The young couple's incompatibility may be summed up by Peter Clearmaker's frequent complaint against his wife. "Ilona, you're too emotional about your feelings." Ilona coped as best she could. She coped by not brooding. As some people collect grievances, she collected moments of joy. She counted her blessings: her piano, her records, her books, her husband's occasional good moods, and above all, her son's company. Although the deposit on their home, 50% of the value of the house, was paid for by Ilona's parents, Clearmaker resented that she was staying at home with their son instead of going back to work. Little Jamie, following his mother around, heard it all. She stood at the kitchen stove, stirring the pot, as his father shouted at her that she should go back to work and start earning some money. "I won't leave Jamie with strangers," she said casually, yet her voice had steel in it. Since Jamie was the only person with whom she could be emotional about her feelings, she passed on to him all her enthusiasms. When she fell in love with a piece of music or a poem, she would share it with Jamie. He was not yet 5 when they played four-handers together on the piano. She recited poems, usually when doing some boring domestic task. She stood on a step-ladder in the kitchen, stretching to put some dishes on a high shelf, then looked down at him and raised her eyebrows to signal playtime. "Altogether elsewhere," she intoned. "Altogether elsewhere, vast herds of reindeer move across miles and miles of golden moss, silently and very fast." They soon recited Auden's stanza together, traveling on rhymes to another world, saying, "Very fast, very fast." When Jamie was old enough to go to school, the boy stunned his teachers by being able to read, write, and spell more or less correctly, and saying things like "stately pleasure dome" or "fortissimo." At home, mother and son had a riot, talking, playing, and singing together, except in the evenings and at weekends, when Jamie's father was at home and they had to be quiet. One of Jamie's first perceptions was that his father loved television, and his mother loved him. His grandfather had ordered a small cello, specially made for Jamie's 7th birthday by the Brazilian master Antonio Picado. The boy was thrilled with the instrument, and declared that he was going to transport people to another world with his music. "Yeah, the kid who wants to walk on water," commented the pharmacist, who happened to overhear him. His son's vainglorious notions got on his nerves, and he never missed an opportunity to cut him down to size. "There's nothing wrong with trying to walk on water, provided you learn to swim first," his wife said cuttingly. "Jim has ambition and imagination, that's what's bothering you." "But a man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for?" I know," replied the father sullenly. Adam Barty thought that his grandson had talent, and paid for his teachers. He had high hopes for Jim as a cellist, both on account of his skills and his total recall. Classical music requires prodigious memory. Great conductors and soloists have every note of whole symphonies and concertos in their heads, which is the equivalent of knowing several Shakespeare plays by heart, word for word. Adam Barty played cello concertos without the aid of a score. In our own day, both Daniel Barenboim and Adam Fischer are famous for conducting immense amounts of music from memory. All of Beethoven's symphonies and the whole of Wagner's Ring Cycle, respectively. The solo player of an instrument has to know at least his own part by heart, and be sufficiently familiar with the rest to blend in with the others. Jim gave his first concert at the age of 14 at his school, playing Vivaldi cello concertos with the school orchestra, without the aid of scores, enthralling an audience of teachers, students, parents, and relatives. This school concert was the last occasion that his grandfather felt triumphant. His wife succumbed to motor neuron disease, and it killed them both. He died 4 months after her. Ilona didn't want her parents to be cremated. She bought a family plot in Mount Pleasant Cemetery and had both of them buried in wooden caskets so that they would become part of the soil and live again in the sapling silver linden tree planted above their grave. Jim visited the grave with his mother every week when it didn't rain or snow. They exchanged their memories of the couple, and sometimes they laughed, scandalizing other visitors to the cemetery. Since Ilona was the Bardys' only child and heir, she became rich. Both Elizabeth and Adam Bardy came from once wealthy families in Hungary, and their fortunes were their instruments. Most of what they earned, Adam Bardy invested in insurance policies, a habit Jim was to follow in later life, which paid for a 4-story mansion on Douglas Drive in Rosedale, an inner-city enclave of winding streets, huge ancient trees, little parks, and handsome old houses. Before they moved into the mansion on Douglas Drive, Ilona enlarged and modernized the kitchen, and had the top floor turned into a separate apartment for her son. Jim was 16 at the time, and among all his friends, he alone had his own apartment. The ancient elm and maple trees in the garden were higher than the house, and he loved to wake during the green months. As soon as he opened his eyes, he was greeted by the shadows of leaves swaying on his whitewashed bedroom walls, cheering him with their silent dance. If their swaying had the same rhythm as the music he had been studying, he could hear the orchestra in his head. The heart of the place was a big music room, with his cello and his mother's piano. The walls there were lined with fiberglass to keep out the noise, and the fiberglass was overlaid with cypress, which is one of the best woods to improve acoustics, and is used in concert halls around the world. He practiced for hours every day, alone or with his mother at the piano. At times, they gave concerts for friends. Jim was 17 when he won a scholarship to the Royal Conservatory. Elizabeth Bardy's violin from the 1710s, made by the great Italian violin maker of Cremona, Giuseppe Antonio Guarneri, was auctioned at Sotheby's in New York, fetching more than the last Stradivari they had sold. The pharmacist felt insulted that her parents didn't even mention him in their will, and felt belittled by her inheritance. For the sake of domestic peace, Ilona bought him a large drugstore on Dunford Avenue with the proceeds. In spite of this multi-million-dollar gift, he was still resentful. Ilona, apart from the Steinway piano and her books, didn't have a strong emotional relationship with money or possessions, and made him joint owner of all they had, including the convenience store next to the drugstore, which she turned into a bookshop, naming it Only Good Books. By then, Jim was old enough to have girlfriends, and she went back to work as a bookseller. She stocked her shop mainly with classics in English, French, Chinese, Spanish, Italian, Hungarian, Greek, Portuguese, German, and half a dozen other languages, wishing to serve the whole of Metro Toronto's literate population. Jim lived in music. Protected from the struggles and anxieties about survival, which drain the strength and spirit of so many young artists. He was only 19 when he became the cellist of the Harthouse Trio, and gave a triumphant performance in Schubert's piano trio in E-flat. Afterwards, he declared at home that he would be the principal cellist of the Toronto Symphony Orchestra in a few years' time. "You're full of big dreams," Clearmaker commented, "but they'll never amount to anything." Whenever Ilona saw Jim pale and angry, she knew why, even if she hadn't heard what went on before. "Never mind your father. He's jealous," she said. "We're a team, and he hates that he isn't part of it." She kissed him on the forehead, then stepped back to look at him. She was proud of his big forehead, which confirmed her faith in his genius. "You'll be just as great a musician as your grandfather, or even better. I know it." His glorious future shone from her eyes. The upward curve of Jim's destiny broke one cold, sunless November morning.